Hello, friends, and welcome. Tonight's story is about love that lingers and the warmth we reach for when the nights grow long. It's about memory and the things we choose to hold on to, even when the world moves on without us. So find yourself something to drink, wrap up in a warm blanket, and snuggle up. This is the dinner party. She woke up to the faint hiss of the wind pressing against the cabin walls, carrying the salt from the sea across the black stones and into her small, worn home. The first light of dawn slipped in through the cracks of the shutters, brushing her hands and the old quilt she drew over herself. She lay for a moment, listening. The gulls called from the cliffs. The tide whispered over the rocks, and the timbers of the cabin creaked as if stretching after a long night. She had grown used to these sounds, each one a marker of time passing, a rhythm she alone followed. Her days were long and solitary, measured in small routines that had become almost sacred over decades of isolation. She rose slowly, stoked the fire with practiced hands, letting the embers take hold while she moved quietly to sweep the hearth. The broom whispered against the wooden floor, dust curling in the rising light, and she worked with deliberate care, aware of every crack and corner in the cabin. Every detail mattered: the placement of a log, the alignment of a cup, the tilt of a candle. In these details, she found a fragile sense of order against the ever-shifting outside world. The world beyond the cabin felt distant. Villagers rarely came to the cliffs where she lived. Children had grown and drifted away. Visits had stopped years ago, and letters sometimes arrived, pale with age and unanswered. She did not resent their absence. She had long ceased to hope for more company than the wind and the gulls. Yet, there was a weight to it, a constant hum of solitude she carried in her chest. She often paused in her work, hands resting on the wooden table, watching the fog curl over the rocks outside, imagining the tide moving silently below, a presence as constant as her own heartbeat. She went about preparing breakfast with deliberate attention, even when there was no one to eat with her. Bread she had baked the day before sat on a plate, buttered lightly and waiting. A small jug of milk stood steady, cream thick at the top. She arranged utensils with care, folding napkins so that each crease fell just so. Every act was performed slowly, deliberately, as though the motion itself could fill the space that had been emptied by years of absence. Outside, the wind tugged at the edges of the shutters, and the fog pressed low over the cliffs. She paused to look through the window, letting the great light of morning wash over her. She noticed the way the driftwood had shifted overnight, how a gull settled briefly on a distant rock before lifting away, how the spray of the tide caught in the morning light. These were small observations, almost trivial, yet they held the weight of her awareness. They reminded her that the world continued, indifferent to absence, yet alive in ways she could feel, touch, and follow. Her home was filled with objects she had collected over the years. Seashells arranged along the windowsill, old photographs pinned carefully to the walls, the faded quilt she wrapped around herself each night. She handled each item with care, sometimes pausing to remember, sometimes to simply acknowledge that it was still there, still part of the rhythm she maintained. She spoke softly to herself, not out of loneliness, but as a way to thread her thoughts into sound. "It's another morning," she would say. "The tide will return, the wind will shift, and I'm still here." This ritual of observation and small attentions carried her through the hours. She moved from task to task, sweeping, arranging, checking the fire, top the water of the basin. Even the simplest act, a log that shifted, a cup wiped with a cloth, became deliberate, meditative, almost sacred in her repetition. In these hours, she felt a quiet kinship with the world, the sea, the wind, the stones, the fog. Yet underneath this kinship lay the persistent ache of isolation, a subtle unspoken yearning for the faces and voices that once had filled her days and were now gone. Even as the morning advanced, she allowed herself brief glimpses of memory. Rune spilling milk as a child, Christina brushing her fingers along the edge of a plate, Anders carrying water with steady care. These images were fleeting, softened by time, yet they grounded her, reminding her that this life of solitude had once been threaded with warmth and connection. Now they existed in fragments, and she preserved them in small rituals, small attentions, and the silent company of the wind and sea. By mid-morning she had moved through nearly all her routines, yet the feeling of anticipation hung quietly in the room. The last night of October approached, and with it, the ritual she had observed for decades. The table would be set, the candles lit, and the quiet feast would unfollow. But for now, she lingered in the stillness of the cabin, savoring the rhythm of her solitary day, aware of every sound, every shift of light, every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. She paused at the window once more, watching the tide move silently across the black stones. She pressed a hand to the glass, feeling the cool, damp fog against her palm. "Another year," she murmured. "Another night to remember. Another night to wait." The anticipation was not anxious, not fearful, but again, deliberate. A slow gathering of presence, a preparation of body, mind, and home for the hour that would come when the world outside and the world beyond would meet at the table she had kept ready. She moved deliberately through the cabin, carrying the tray she had prepared with bread, a jug of fresh milk, and a small bowl of fruit. Each item felt heavier in her hands than it should, laden not with weight, but with the significance she placed upon them. She set the tray down on the table and paused, letting her eyes drift over the worn wood, noticing its scratches, its subtle unevenness, the way the surface had absorbed years of meals and memories. She began the ritual as she always did, placing the plates first, one for each guest she would never see, yet whose presence she felt in every corner of the cabin. The plates were arranged carefully, their position exact, their alignment reflecting the order of their lives in her mind. She poured the milk into each cup with gentle hand, careful not to spill a single drop. The bread, still warm from the oven, was sliced and arranged. Small crumbs left deliberately to suggest as if her family had arrived before her. The candles were next. She selected the tallest, most stable from the shelf, lighting it slowly, watching as the flame caught on and steadied. One by one she lit the others, their flickering light stretching shadows across the room, warming the cabin in golden hues. The dancing shadows made the corners seem to breathe, and she let herself imagine them moving like quiet companions in the otherwise still space. Even the smallest touches mattered. Napkins were folded, the edges pressed sharply, the creases aligned with care. A seashell here, a small stone there, objects collected over the years from the shore were placed along the windowsill and table, each a silent witness to the ritual, each holding a fragment of the world beyond the walls of the cabin. The smell of the bread mingled with the faint salt in the air, and the scent of the fire smoke wrapped itself around the table, settling over the plates and cups as if to bless them. She moved slowly, deliberately, her hands tracing the shapes of the tables and chairs. She paused at each place setting, imagining the ghostly presence of her family as she had done for decades. But today, there was a difference in her awareness. She knew that soon, the room would be filled not with memory alone, but with the quiet weight of those who had passed. Not absent, not imagined, but present in a form she could see, sense, and feel. She set the final plate, stepped back, and exhaled slowly, letting the warmth of the candles and fire mingle with the chill that pressed at the windows. Outside, the wind had picked up, sweeping the fog closer to the cabin, curling it around the stones. She could feel the movement in the tide even without seeing it, a slow, inevitable pulse that mirrored the rhythm of her own heart. Sitting for a moment, she let herself breathe and listen. The creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, the shifting of the logs, the faint tap of the wind against the shutters, all of it formed a quiet symphony that carried the anticipation of what was to come. She murmured softly to herself, a habit ingrained over decades. It's ready. I have waited, and soon they will come. Her eyes traced each plate and cup again, noticing small details she had missed. A crumb fallen just slightly out of place, a flicker of wax from a candle catching a shadow on the wall, the way the milk caught the light in the jug, soft and pale. She adjusted them, moving methodically, with care born of long practice. This wasn't just preparation, it was conversation. A dialogue continued in silence for the present she expected to arrive. The light in the cabin dimmed further as afternoon bled toward evening. Shadows lengthened across the table, and she felt the familiar tightening of anticipation coil gently in her chest. She had done this countless times before, yet each year it felt like the first. A balance of solitude, memory, and the quiet promise of what would come when the guests arrived. Her solitude had shaped her, trained her patience, and made her senses acute. She felt every shift in the air, every change in the light, every almost imperceptible tremor in the room. Finally, she stepped back from the table, brushing her hands together, and let her gaze linger on the scene she had created. The bread, the milk, the fruit, the candles, all of it waiting, quiet, precise, luminous in the dim light. The room seemed to inhale with her, holding itself ready, poised on the threshold of something both familiar and extraordinary. She did not feel fear, only the calm certainty that, as always, the hour would arrive when the room would be filled with the quiet, attentive presence of those she had loved and lost. The candles flickered softly in the gathering dusk, their light warm against the chill pressing through the cabin walls. She stood beside the table, hands folded lightly over the chest, eyes tracing the plates she had arranged so carefully. Outside, the fog crept closer, curling over the stones and wrapping the cabin in a quiet, gentle shroud. She had performed this ritual countless times, yet each year she retained the weight of something extraordinary, something alive in the room before it appeared. The first presence came slowly, like a ripple in the air, a faint shimmer near the doorway, a subtle bend in the light, and there she was, Christina. She glided to her place with a grace that made the floorboards sigh under invisible weight. Her outline was faintly luminous, flickering with the golden glow of the candles, her form precise and delicate. She moved as if noticing each small detail, adjusting to the edge of her napkin without speaking, a gesture familiar and intimate. Her lips curved into a soft, serene smile. Then, as if summoned by the rhythm of the cabin itself, Runa appeared. A small figure, hovering just above the floor, translucent yet casting a subtle shadow across the table. His presence was lighter, playful in the quietest way, and he lingered near his plate, brushing the air gently with his hand. A crumb shifted beneath his touch, and he smiled. Not at her, but at the act itself, the ritual completed. She watched, unmoved by fear, her attention fully absorbed in the precise unfolding of the moment. Anders came last, leaning slightly forward as he settled near his plate. His form was steady, calm, and full, carrying the weight of presence without heaviness. He did not speak, nor did he need to. His eyes seemed to fold the soft warmth of familiarity, the patient acknowledgement of a lifelong past, but never forgotten. The air around him shimmered faintly, bending just enough to catch the candlelight, as though the room itself recognized the completion of her ritual. She moved among them with care, adjusting a cup here, straightening a napkin there, brushing her hand lightly over the edge of a plate. She spoke softly, not expecting an answer, but feeling the room respond in its own way. "I have kept this for you," she murmured. "It is ready, as always." Her voice blended with the soft crackle of the fire, the sigh of the wind, the distant murmur of waves pressing against the shore. One by one, the ghosts settled fully into their places. Christina leaned slightly, her hands hovering over the table. Rune shifted as if settling onto an invisible chair, and Anders leaned forward just enough to cast a subtle shadow over his plate. They were present without words, luminous without force, quiet without absence. She observed each movement, noting the gentle sway of their forms, the subtle bend of candlelight over their figures. Each arrival was precise, ritualized, a dance of patience and recognition. The cabin felt alive in their presence, not in fear, but in warmth. Ingrid moved among them calmly, topping off the milk in each cup, adjusting crumbs on the bread, straightening napkins one final time. Her hands brushed against the edge of the table, as though grounding herself in the reality of their forms. Yet the sense of the uncanny never startled her. She knew this hour, this gathering, this meeting of the living and the past. It came with the certainty of the tide, with the rhythm of the seasons, with the quiet, patient acknowledgement of time itself. Hours passed. She spoke in fragments to herself. A comment on the fog pressing against the windows, the shift of light over the sea, the subtle smell of salt carried by the wind. The ghosts did not answer, but they did not need to. Their quiet attendance, the deliberate, patient unfolding of their presence, filled the cabin with warmth, with memory, with something beyond words. It was a conversation in light, in movement, in deliberate rhythm of ritual and recognition. The fire crackled, the candles flickered, and the room seemed suspended in a space between worlds. Outside, the wind rose and fell, pressing the fog closer to the cabin and tugging at the edges of the shutters. Yet inside, all was calm, warm, intimate. She moved slowly from plate to plate, her eyes tracing each ghost, each outline, each subtle bend of light. She felt their attention as fully as if they were breathing, felt their presence in the weightless rhythm that filled the space. Finally, she paused and looked around the table, letting her gaze linger. The candle's glow caught the subtle shimmer of each ghost, painting the room with a soft, golden warmth. She exhaled slowly, the quiet of the cabin pressing gently against her chest, and she let her mind drift forward, toward the questions she had pondered for decades. What is life after death? What does it feel like beyond this quiet room, beyond the rhythm of tide and wind, beyond even this ritual? The fire's warmth spread slowly through the cabin, curling into shadows that stretched along the walls and across the table. She stood for a long moment, hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, her gaze tracing the gentle shimmer of the ghosts settle around her. They did not move beyond the small gestures of presence, a hand hovering near a cup, a slight tilt of the head, the soft sway of a chair that wasn't there, and yet their being filled the room with something that went beyond light. She spoke softly, not expecting them to answer. "I wonder," she murmured. "I wonder what it's like beyond this. Is it like this room, calm and steady, or vast, endless, as the sea stretches beyond the cliffs?" The words hung between her and the figures around the table, dissolving into the soft crackle of the fire, mingling with the smell of bread and salt in the air. She imagined it carefully, step by step, like following a thread into the dark. Perhaps the world after death was not an absence at all, but a different kind of presence, lighter, quieter, yet warm. Perhaps one could move without weight, glide through space as effortlessly as the fog drifts across the shore, touch without changing, and be touched without need. She pictured Rune stepping across clouds instead of floorboards, Christina brushing her hand along beams of light, Anders tilting his head to listen to whispers of wind that carried messages from all directions. She considered the passage of time there. Here she had known the slow weight of years, the creeping quiet of solitude. But in an imagined space, perhaps the weight would lift, the hours folding into one another like soft waves, each moment whole, undivided. She imagined her own steps, careful and deliberate, as they had always been, yet freed from gravity of expectation, from the absence that pressed on her here. Her thoughts drifted further. If the dead existed there, as they did here, perhaps they carried warmth with them, not chill, presence, not silence. The idea settled into her like a gentle tide. She could imagine Christine smiling in the softest of lights, Rune laughing without sound, Anders holding a quiet watchfulness that needed no acknowledgement. They were not absent, not lost. They were simply present in a way that she could feel, even if she could not speak with them. She considered her own life. The long decades marked by absence and the unbroken rhythm of solitude. She had measured herself against tides and seasons, waves and winds, footsteps across the sand. She had lived with the quiet of empty rooms and still hearts, with a persistent hum of longing that never demanded, only observed. Perhaps death was not the end, she thought, but another rhythm, another form of presence, lighter, freer, yet still bound to the echoes of care and attention she had carried for so long. She lingered in these thoughts, letting them stretch, expand, and fill the quiet spaces of the cabin. Each ghost at the table shimmered faintly in the candlelight, their outlines steady and luminous, as if acknowledging her reflection without interference. She watched the fire, its flames bending toward the ghost in subtle acknowledgement, the air carrying the warmth of the room through every corner. The tide moved beyond the windows, steady and patient. She imagined herself there, walking along the edge of the world, feeling neither weight nor absence, only continuity. The tide, the wind, the shifting light of a sky that held both beginning and end. Her breath mingled with the gentle warmth in the cabin, with the imagined presence of the world beyond, a silent certainty pressing into her chest, that what was to come would not be frightening, not lonely, not absent, but somehow full, somehow complete. Hours passed, though she did not mark them. The fire burned low, the candles flickered and bent, the wind whispered its stories through the cracks. She continued to move among the ghosts, adjusting a cup here, brushing crumbs there, her mind tracing the paths she imagined beyond the threshold of life. She thought of the moving, of herself moving, of the quiet joy of presence without absence, the steady comfort of continuity. She spoke one last time, softly, a thread of voice weaving through the room. I will see you again, in time. And until then, I will keep the table ready. I will wait for the tide, for the light, for the wind, for all that remains. Her words drifted into the cabin and beyond, mingling with candlelight and shadow, with fog and tide, with the delicate, luminous forms at her table. The fire had softened into a gentle glow, its warmth curling quietly along the floorboards and across the table. She moved slowly among the candles, adjusting one there, tilting another slightly to catch the light. The ghosts remained seated, luminous and patient, each figure distinct, each presence steady yet delicate. They did not speak, and she did not expect them to. Their company was in the silence, in the rhythm of attention and care, in the warmth that threaded through the room. Outside, the tide had begun its retreat, the fog lifting just enough to reveal the darkened stones beneath. The wind softened, sighing against the cabin walls like a whispered farewell. She watched the change from her window, noticing the subtle shift in light, the pale grey beginning to stretch across the horizon. Her hand rested lightly on the table, fingertips grazing the edge as though touching the memory of each form gathering there. One by one, the ghost began to fade, though not abruptly. Christina's outline softened first, the candlelight bending around her as she seemed to dissolve into a golden glow. Rune shimmered faintly, a playful ripple passing through his form before he, too, became a whisper of light. Anders lingered the longest, his presence gentle but steady, until finally the room held only the warm shadows of the candles and the steady pulse of the fire. She remained where she had been, breathing slowly, letting the quiet settle around her. The table was empty, yet full in its own way, full with the memory of presence, with a sense of ritual honored and repeated, with the comfort of company that had been luminous, gentle, and entirely unspoken. She traced the edge of a plate with her fingertip, then the rim of a cup, feeling the lingering warmth of the space, the faint resonance of the forms that had occupied it. The candles flickered one last time before bending low, their flames reflecting against the walls like tiny, quiet witnesses. She knelt by the table, adjusting a napkin, brushing crumbs into a small pile, attending to the details even as the firelight softened. Her movements were deliberate, not hurried, not anxious, but fully absorbed in the care that had always defined this night. Outside, the tide whispered over the black stones, each wave carrying away the chill of the night and leaving only the soft, persistent memory of water and wind. She rose, stepping carefully to the window, watching as the first hints of pale dawn stretched across the horizon. The fog had lifted further, leaving the world crisp and silvered by the early light. She pressed her hand to the glass, feeling the faint chill, and smiled softly. For decades, this ritual had been her anchor, her conversation with the absent, a bridge between worlds. Tonight, as always, it had carried her beyond solitude, beyond time, into a space that was both ordinary and extraordinary. The ghosts had come, they had been present, and they had left. But they had left warmth behind, a quiet, lingering assurance that the table would always be ready, the fire always kept, the candlelight always waiting. She stepped back from the window, taking a deep, steadying breath. She moved through the cabin slowly, touching the shelf where seashells rested, adjusting the quilt on her bed, letting her fingers brush the walls as if leaving a thread of herself behind. The room was empty, yet it was not lonely. The tide, the wind, the candlelight, the shadows, and the echo of those who had appeared all lingered, pressing gently against her awareness. She spoke softly, almost to herself, almost to them. Until next year, until the table is ready again, until the tide carries me forward, as it always does. Outside, the dawn spread fully across the cliffs, painting the stones with silver light. The fog receded, leaving the world washed and quiet. She remained by the table for a while longer, letting the calm settle into her bones. She did not fear the hours to come, did not mourn the passing of the night, but allowed herself the simple, profound comfort of continuity, of memory, of ritual, of presence beyond absence. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the horizon, the sea whispered in agreement. The wind pressed softly against the cabin, and the world held its breath with her, warm, still, and luminous.